Dude, never did it.
Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Jake Ziegler, and I'm here with Brad Garoon. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today, we're covering the year 1991, and we have a very special guest with us today. Mr. Mike Tanzillo is here with us. Hi, Mike.
Hi, everybody.
Now, so for those who don't know, Mike, close friend of mine, but also we wanted to have him on, and we'll grill him about this later, has some touch points in the movie industry, formerly of Blue Sky Studios, worked on some movies you've seen as an animator and lighting designer. So we'll talk a bit about that later. But first, we're going to talk about some movies in 1991, starting with, I don't even know how to talk about this movie. So starting with JFK. I would think that this would have fallen right in my wheelhouse because it's got Matthau and Lemon. It's got both of my guys, but in very small roles. For those who don't know, if you don't know anything about movies, JFK is a movie about the investigation into the John F. Kennedy assassination and an attempt to start holding people personally responsible for the assassination that may or may not have actually been involved outside of, I would say Robert E. Lee. No, that's not right. Outside of Gary Oldman. What's the name of? Not him.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Because I was like, John Wilkes Booth? No. Outside of Lee Harvey Oswald and even Jack Ruby. So here's my take. First, before any of that, Jake, why did you give us JFK?
Number one, it had been a long time since I had seen it. I definitely remember watching it, but it had been a while. So it's one like, I'd like to revisit this one. And it's such a big movie. I mean, it's over 3 hours long. I mean, the cast is gigantic. I know it's kind of like a procedural investigation type movie. And I like that. I really like Kevin Costner. I've kind of been remembering how much I like Kevin Costner lately. So I was like, yeah, this seems like a good one to rewatch. And knowing you'd never seen it, it seemed like one that you would like too. So there's a lot of things about it that I was like, this one will appeal to Brad. And then yeah, I wanted to rewatch it. And it's just such an interesting, obviously, presidential assassinations are fairly rare. This is, the most recent one to our lifetime. So, I mean, it's nothing that, nothing that we've ever experienced in our lifetime, but it's the most recent one. I thought all those things combined would make for a good podcast.
I'm also curious as to why you've never seen it, Brad. You have a presidential history brain. I know you love presidential history. You love films. It seems like a natural film for you to see. Is this something that you were actively avoiding, or did it just not come up?
I can't say I was actively avoiding it, although I don't jive much with Oliver Stone's style. I like Wall Street. We did that for the podcast, but I didn't love it. I've watched the first 10 minutes of W probably 4 times and then turned it off. I just find him real stodgy, which is pretty wild because he attracts the best casts, like the absolute best. Just real quick, going over this cast. So Jake mentioned Kevin Costner, Tommy Lee Jones, Gary Oldman, who I think carries this movie on his back. The fact that Tommy Lee Jones, I mean, Jake, we texted about this back and forth a little bit, and we'll talk about when we get into the Oscar conversation, but that Tommy Lee Jones got all the Oscar love for this and not Gary Oldman is baffling to me.
Also not Joe Pesci, who I thought was phenomenal.
Amazing.
Joe Pesci
I thought
incredible.
he rocked this like very complicated role. I think he killed it. When I saw Tommy Lee Jones got all the awards love for the supporting role, I was like, everybody else brought nothing against Tommy Lee Jones. I thought he did great, but everybody else was bringing their air game across the board.
Yeah.
Even John Candy and whatever that role was.
Well, we'll talk about the John Candy thing because it jives with the Joe Pesci thing. File both under things. I watched this with my wife, things that she did not understand why they were happening. Joe Pesci's eyebrows and John Candy's entire performance. But then you've got Kevin Bacon, Michael Rooker, Laurie Metcalf in like a pretty, I would say, uncelebrated but well done role. Sissy Spacek being in a different movie than everybody else.
Yeah.
Pruitt Taylor Vince, who was unrecognizable here because he was so young and I would say borderline normal looking. Now he has like he's like the guy with shifty eyes who's fat and bald, and you see him in like M. Night Shyamalan stuff. And J.O. Sanders also, all great. And then little cool cameos by Walter Matthau, Jack Lemmon, and Donald Sutherland and Ed Asner. Just like these gray guys doing really cool stuff. That said, I didn't like this.
Say more things.
As it went on, I went back and forth between feeling this movie is really focused on things that I find uninteresting, like whether or not Kevin Costner is going to be home for dinner, and things that I think are actively harmful to society. There's a grand, gigantic, enormous conspiracy to kill the president because he wanted to bring us closer to communism. I don't know what Oliver Stone's political views are. Jake, I know you know more about like his documentaries and things like that. And I think they've changed quite a bit over the decades after this movie came out. But watching this, My vibe on Stone was he's like a tanky who wants Russia to take over the United States. And I found it really frustrating watching Costner's character fall into that. And I think there's a way that most people watched it, which is like, oh, how interesting. He's becoming a paranoid lunatic. And one thing I did like about the movie, and then I'll stop ranting, is that anytime anyone talked about their theories about the assassination, they did sound like a lunatic. And that was clearly by design. Stone wants them to sound crazy. Costner sounds crazy. Sutherland sounds crazy. Lemon sounds crazy. Pesci sounds really crazy. Everyone, when they're talking about like quote unquote what really happened, they sound absolutely insane, which I thought was an interesting touch. But by the end of the movie, I started, especially with the pre-credits crawl, the message of the movie seemed to be, we're all dupes. And JFK was really assassinated by 1,000 people. And when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, this is how we got anti-vax. This is how we got conspiracy theory after conspiracy. This is how we got RFK. Granted, he's very closely connected to the subject of this movie. That stuff makes me really nervous. So I had some issues with it.
I mean, that's 100% true. JFK, the conspiracy around JFK has led to the conspiracy theories of today. I was like, JFK was back when conspiracy theories were fun. I don't know if fun is the right word, but like when it was like, okay, like this was the patient zero of all the conspiracy theories that we see today. Because this was pre-internet. When this movie came out, it was pre-internet, right? This was like, everyone was just kind of like reading occasional articles on it. There was no way to really look this stuff up. So this reveal, and especially that Donald Sutherland character conversation was like the big reveal. And it's such a bummer that that was not a real conversation. Like, it's such a bummer that that person does not exist. That conversation never existed. Like, everything else about this movie is pseudo historically accurate. But that was the thing that tied the whole story together. And it was just a pure fabrication. It was just storytelling. And he got in a lot of trouble for that. I think that's a little bit justified given the context here. Like, you have to be more truthful than to make up a mysterious boogeyman that's going to piece everything together for you and lay it all out in a nice, succinct 10-minute conversation.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually didn't know that was totally fabricated. And as I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh yeah, this scene is the scene that's going to set people off, because it's like, why weren't the planes there? Why were we in the Arctic Circle? Why was this happening? I was like, oh yeah, those are interesting questions. Now, granted, he probably pulled all those things and combined them into one character, but to make it seem like there's a government official or a military official who's telling you that these things are true, I don't know. I don't think a director should get in trouble for doing stuff in a movie, for portraying stuff in a movie. And Stone's career as a major filmmaker is over. But I was mad. I was mad watching that scene. I'll tell you the truth. Jake, where are you at on JFK?
I'm definitely more into it than you are. I didn't quite it didn't upset me in that way. But I do agree with like the things like, is, Kevin Costner going to be home on Easter for anything? Like, not interested in any of that. Like, that's been done in a million other movies. Like, don't care about any of that. But like, when they really stick to like the procedural stuff, like the investigative stuff, like strip away any of the, is this real? Is it not real? Is it truthful? Is it not truthful? I find that stuff really interesting as a movie and like really well made. Like, Stone as a director, like I said, he's really hit and miss with me. Like, I think his good movies are like really, really good. And then if it's not good, it's really, really bad. And then in this one, I think when it's on and when the movie's like focused like kind of on the investigative parts of it, like I said, I think that stuff's really good. Like you said, like when you mentioned Laurie Metcalf, like I think like the scenes with like Laurie Metcalf and Michael Rooker and like all those people together, and like those scenes where they're like discussing things that are going on, I think that stuff is really good. One of the performances where I think one of the people who doesn't sound like a lunatic when they're talking is, I actually think, Kevin Bacon, when he has his small part. Like, I actually think his performance is like really interesting, because he's just got that one really, really small scene, but he's one of the few people who, like, so he doesn't seem like he has anything to gain or anything to lose, really, by talking about like his experiences. Like, there doesn't seem to be anything kind of behind what he's doing. So I really liked his performance in it too. So there's definitely a lot about this movie that I liked. And like I said, I tried to just completely, because I'm not an expert on like the JFK conspiracy or the, like any of the what actually happened and what didn't. And I even watched, Stone did a follow-up documentary on it just a couple of years ago that's streaming on Paramount Plus, that, if you're really into the whole JFK thing, would be, it's an interesting watch, but I'm still not an expert on it or anything. So I just try to watch it like just as a pure movie, as if it's all completely made up. And in that sense, I think a lot of it works.
How do we feel about Costner's performance and emulation of Gregory Peck, or just his sort of falling into, I am the star of To Kill a Mockingbird in the last 30 minutes of the movie?
When you hire Kevin Costner, this is what you get. You know what I mean? Like, this is the same year that Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves came out. Like, he's the same character in both of these movies. He is Kevin Costner in every movie he's ever been in. And at this point in his career, if you don't know that, like, that's on you. And I think that this is the perfect role for him, because everything else is chaos around him. You got Joe Pesci's eyebrows. You got John Candy talking about Creole. You got Kevin Bacon sweating a lot. Like you have everything going crazy around him. And he's just, and it's like this grounding force in the middle of the movie that's just like, oh, that's right. It's Kevin Costner. Okay. I'm a Kevin Costner guy. I like him. I like him in Field of Dreams. I like him in Bull Durham. I like him across the board. I think that his role was kind of like I said, perfect for this movie. And the other thing I want to mention about this movie before we move on too much is the editing of it. I found it was the first. I don't notice editing normally. It's not like my thing. But like there were so many times in this movie where a character is telling like the non-conspiracy theory story part of the story, but the video footage over top of it was the conspiracy theory. I don't know if you noticed that. It happened over and over and over again, and it kept making me laugh because they would be like, "Oh yeah, no, we went duck hunting in Texas," and it would be like what you're seeing is them like murdering somebody or whatever. And so I think what I kept saying throughout this movie is like, "Oh, this is a competent movie. It's a movie that was well thought out, that was like paced well, like other than the Easter scenes, which again, I literally." It's like, I don't know who this is for. Sissy Spacek is such a good actress. And they just like threw her as this whiny housewife the whole time. And I was like, I don't know what we're doing here.
It was to get women into the theater. It has to be. There's no other explanation. It's like, oh, ladies aren't interested in the JFK conspiracy theory, but they are interested in Christian holidays and nagging their husbands. I will say, Sissy Spacek was sexy as hell in this movie. Her arms looked so good. I think she's one of the most underrated hotties in Hollywood history.
I'm a Michael Rooker guy. I like Michael Rooker.
Okay, Mike.
But it's interesting that because they do that stuff all the time. It's like, okay, well, we've got Oswald's wife is an interesting character. Laurie Metcalf plays a really interesting character in it. But it's like we got to just throw in this traditional. We got to show it's stressing him out at home, and the only way we can do that is like a super naggy wife. I don't know what that was.
There's a mini series based on, I think, a Stephen King book, or based on a book anyway, called 11/22/63, which is the date that JFK died. And the miniseries stars James Franco. It's a time travel movie about can he go back in time and stop the assassination from happening. I only bring it up because Oswald's wife is a major character in that, and she's really good. It's a very interesting character in that. Now, that's sci-fi and alternate history nonsense, but it's a pretty solid miniseries. I think it's still on Hulu. Worth checking out.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Jake, what else do we need to know about this movie?
One of the things that I thought of too, I know I just talked about how much I viewed the movie as like trying to think of nothing real about it, but it kind of blew my mind thinking about when Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald and how that was just on TV and like people saw that as it happened. I know, we grew up and saw 9/11, like, like kind of as that, as that was happening. And that was like, that's kind of the big, traumatic event of our, and that was obviously a lot more people died, but like just to see like another person, just straight up walk up to someone and just murder them on live TV. That's kind of mind blowing to me. Like I actually kind of had to pause the movie and just like take a break there. I was like, I just can't even imagine watching it. Like you're just watching TV and then like all of a sudden some guy just gets straight up murdered. That was just really strange.
So it's happened a few times in television history. Like there's I forget his name. There was a news anchor who committed suicide on live television.
Yep.
I got to tell you, one of the things that upset me about this movie, I've never seen the Zapruder film before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I'd never seen it. I mean, I knew it existed.
Another never did it then.
Yeah, right. And I got to say, I was pretty upset that in the middle of this movie is a real life snuff film, and you watch over and over again JFK get murdered in front of your eyes in a very graphic manner.
It's gruesome.
It's interesting because like most people, when they saw this movie, this was their first time seeing the Zapruder film. Again, this is like seeing a 9/11 cell phone footage, but you're seeing it for the first time 25 years after the event, or 38 years after the event happened.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's interesting that you had that reaction, because that's the audience's reaction. It was meant for shock value. It was meant
I don't know. I mean, so Faces of Death existed when we were growing up. We saw those videos at Blockbuster. They are videos of people really dying. They're about to make a Faces of Death movie, but it's not that. It's going to be a fictional movie. I think it's some kind of horror movie with like a legitimate horror director, not some nobody off the street, like a legitimate director. I forget who is taking it on. But that's all to say, I never watched Faces of Death, and I thought people who did were absolutely psychotic. And I think there's just like something to be said for not actually showing people die on screen, especially like against someone's will. Like I try not to be too precious about things, but this movie in a lot of places made me feel like I was clutching my pearls and I felt precious about them. And one of those things is like having the sanctity of not seeing someone die on film. So I don't know, that I have really mixed feelings about that being included.
I think they definitely tie it back to reality, because it actually played a big role in the justification of it all, the back into the left thing. Like, and to see it on the footage, it's like, I'm back and forth on it too. Because I think that showing it multiple times allowed you to break away from like the murder and the death that's happening on there, to be like, to go back to the analytical courtroom drama thing, which would actually kind of happen. Yeah, man, it's tough. Yeah, and just like the reactions of everybody, and I mean, they're doing it over and over and over again in the courtroom. I mean, it's been spoofed, it's been parodied. It's the scene from this movie. It's Seinfeld's best bit. But like when you watch it, I forgot how many times they actually showed it. Like how many times they actually, like, because the back and the left thing, they talk about it, but then they show it and they show it and they show it and they show it. They get closer and closer.
My favorite spoof of it is not the Seinfeld one, although that one's very good. It's from The Critic, because it's not so much a joke about the scene as it is about how Oliver Stone makes movies that are too long. And the joke in The Critic is like, and coming up, our review of the extended edition of JFK, which actually exists and is 4 hours long. But when this movie came out, it didn't exist yet. And the joke is just Costner on screen saying back and to the left, I think 15 times. That's like a 60-second stretch of a 22-minute cartoon.
The Critic is criminally underrated TV show. It did not last long enough.
Yeah, The Critic was awesome. Guernica. I don't remember what movie I was watching, but Guernica factored into it somehow, the painting, and I can only think of Jay Sherman's father destroying Guernica and saying, "Take that, Guernica." Oh, it was one of Denis Villeneuve's early movies, features Guernica. Polytechnique. Okay. It makes an appearance in the movie.
I did want to bring one fact about this movie do you know that Lee Harvey Oswald was only 24 years old when he did this? Like they talk about his past, like he went to military, he went to Russia, he did this, he's married, he's got multiple kids. Like he was 24 years old. Like I
remember that.
There's something about
the movie, yeah,
there's something about it, like the way he looks, maybe I don't know. I thought he was like 38 years old.
Like 3 weeks ago on an episode did me and Orson Welles, and the guy playing Orson Welles in that movie is like 35. And everything that you know about Orson Welles in that movie makes it seem like he's lived this like really intense life. He's 22 years old when that movie comes. Orson Welles is 22 years old. He's already one of the most famous people on Broadway or in the New York theater scene, and is about to make one of the most important movies of all time.
It's the remaking Beverly Hills Cop, and like
sequel.
Yeah, as a sequel. So it's like, Eddie Murphy, obviously Judge Reinhold, and I was like, the third guy, I was like, oh, he's probably no longer with us. And then I looked up, he's like 72 years old. I was like, wait, he was 35.
Yeah, he looked like he was 1,000 in Beverly Hills.
I was like, wait.
I think I'm the only person who's excited for that Beverly Hills Cop remake, because I really like Beverly Hills Cop, and I like that. I mean, Martin Brest, just an incredible director, Geely notwithstanding. And I don't know, they got the whole gang back together for the remake.
Wasn't the whole gang in Beverly Hills Cop 3, though?
But Beverly Hills Cop 3 didn't come out this year. It's a new movie for me to watch with people I really like.
I love the first one, too. I'll give it a shot. I think the first one's great.
I like that Paul Reiser's back. He played such a small role in that first movie.
The other thing I liked about JFK is that Kevin Costner knows every single person in New Orleans. Everywhere they go, it's like, hey, do you know Jim Smith? And he's like, of course I know Jim Smith. Like it's like, what do you see? Who used to own that office? Well, that was Frank Reynolds, pediatric.
Frank Reynolds from Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Yeah. That was the fake name I came up with. They treated New Orleans like there was 38 people in that town, and everybody knew everybody. Guy Bannister, of course I know Guy Bannister's, or Clay Bannister's, Clay Shaw. What? Like so we're all just on board with it. We all just know who that is. We're all this kind of rich guy.
Going back a little bit to your point about editing, I think my favorite bit in the movie was how that Clay Bannister, Clay Shaw getting arrested and giving his alias scene. I really like how they shot that and how they went back to it when that was made not admissible in evidence. I thought that was a very cool bit. Okay, so what was the Oscar situation for JFK? This is a big year. We know that Silence of the Lambs dominated. How did JFK fare?
JFK actually did fairly well. It got 8 nominations total. It won 2 of them, and you guys are so smart and noticed the right things, because Brad, you just mentioned about how cool it was the way something was shot, because it won for cinematography, and then Mike, you mentioned the editing earlier, and it won the Oscar for best editing. You guys hit them. And the other ones that it was up for that it did not win, it was up for best picture and director. So Tommy Lee Jones, as we mentioned, up for supporting actor, and then it was also up for adapted screenplay, sound mixing, and original score. Well, all of which it lost, but so I mean that's a pretty good year. You go 2 for 8. That's not bad with about some high level nominations. So yeah, pretty good year. Oliver Stone was still a pretty good name.
Awesome. Okay, so that'll do it for JFK for now. I'm sure we'll be referring back to it for many episodes because it really stirred some stuff up in me. But just one last thing.
Is it Sissy Spacek debating whether that Sunday was Easter Sunday or just a normal Sunday? I didn't know it was Easter Sunday. What was I scheduled? It's like, oh my gosh, the logistics of this meeting.
Yeah.
To be fair to Kevin Costner, the logistics of when Easter is make no sense. I just learned that this year. It makes no sense. But I have to say, and we talked about this on the Random Acts of Cinema podcast, Walter Matthau's cameo was too short. He's only
Much
in one
too short,
scene.
yeah.
He kills it. It's like one of his best performances is this cameo. It's one of the best performances in his entire career. And it's 30 seconds long. It's not fair. And Jack Lemmon's is not that much longer, but he's also finally playing not Jack Lemmon, which is pretty cool. And then Ed Asner is so scary. So I just wanted to give one shout to all the old guys in this movie.
Yeah, the Ed Asner one, I had a hard time reconciling that. Like, it's Carl.
It's
like,
Santa Claus.
Yeah, but we did mention John Candy though briefly too. But like, yeah, that was the biggest part of the movie for me. I was like, what is happening and why is this happening? Like, what is he doing? I mean, I'm sure he's just following, he's following his direction, of course. But like, why is this his direction? And
right.
I mean, what's one of these things, like he could be doing a perfect imitation of this real person who could be very much have said these exact words in this exact way, in this exact order, but it still sounds fake and ridiculous to me. And I couldn't get past it. And it was very upsetting to me because I love John Candy and I don't want to say bad things about him because he was great. But like, this was too much, man.
Yeah. It's very much a situation of, oh, we love this historical character because he was bigger than life. No one's going to believe he's real. Correct. Take it out.
Yeah. He also, I don't believe, delivered anything to the plot at all. I think it was just because he just kind of like jumbled words and just had like funny sayings in the courtroom and in the bar, and that was it. Like it was like, it's a shame because this was the time when John Candy was like trying to transition to more dramatic roles. Like this is the same year that Only the Lonely came out, which was like more of a dramatic. And so like I think he was like, for him, he was trying to make this transition, and I think that he just took a couple bad swings. But like Oliver Stone, JFK, you get to play this like cameo cool thing, and it's like, what do you want me to say?
Yeah, it was bad. But something that was not bad was the film Only Yesterday. So when I knew we wanted to have Mike on, I offered him years where we were doing animated movies. Now, all of I think except for one, Jake, you gave me The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, but with the exception of that and maybe one other old Disney movie, I'm the one recommending all these animated movies because I'm obsessed with animated films. And one you hadn't seen, one of the few Ghibli movies you hadn't seen was this. It was Only Yesterday. And Mike, with your background in animation, that being such a big part of your actual career, we wanted to have you on to talk about an animated movie. So Only Yesterday was directed by Isao Takahata, the unsung hero of Studio Ghibli. A lot of people just associate Studio Ghibli with Hayao Miyazaki, with good reason. His movies are way more known, I think, both in Japan and in the United States, but especially here. But Isao Takahata is responsible for some of the best movies, I'm going to say flat out, of the last 50 years, including one we've covered on this podcast before, Grave of the Fireflies, which could not be one more depressing or more different than Only Yesterday. The only thing these two movies have in common is that they're both really grounded in reality. And that's one of the things that I think is so cool about Takahata's movies. His other movies that people might know are My Neighbors the Yamadas, which is based on a comic strip, but also, even though it's the characters are more stylized and it's more episodic, it's very much just about a family. And he did The Tale of Princess Kaguya, which does have some fantastical elements to it, but also is largely about real people. I mean, not real people, but regular people who happen to be experiencing something otherworldly in their world. It's not like Spirited Away or Howl's Moving Castle where the whole world becomes heightened. And I'm not disparaging those movies at all. I love those movies. But anyway, so that's why I recommended Only Yesterday. Let's start with Jake. What did you think of Only Yesterday?
I loved this movie, loved it a lot, and I'm so glad you recommended it. I don't know why I had never seen it because I remember when it came out. It finally came to the US. It came out on like DVD in like 2016. It took a long time for this movie to come here for whatever reason. And I remember buying the DVD or the Blu-ray when it came out or whatever. And then for whatever reason, I never got around to watching it. I don't know why. And then I was poor for a while and ended up having to sell most of my Blu-rays. And then I still never got around to watching it. And so I'm really, really glad that I finally did. It's really a beautiful movie. It's very simple. It's just a wonderful story. The long story is that, I loved it, and I'm really glad that I finally have seen it.
I forgot to say what it's about. It's about a young lady who has not a high pressure job, but a professional job in Tokyo. So she decides to go on a little vacation to a rural village that she went to when she was younger to spend time with I believe it's her brother-in-law's family. While she's there, she keeps remembering things that happened to her when she was in 5th grade. And so it's really a dual story of what she's going through as an adult and how it was informed by things she experienced in 5th grade. And the cover art is her as an adult and her as a 10-year-old. So yeah, that's the deal. Mike, what'd you think of it?
I'm so glad that you recommended this movie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. After about the first 20 minutes, where I had to break my American brain and like try and get to the pacing of this film, which was like, because I was like, okay, because you guys maybe do the same thing too, but I'm like watching a movie, I start to try and break down the structure. Like I'm looking at like, okay, this is what's going to happen. Here's a protagonist. But it's none of that. It's just like, it's a very simple story with very simple, like deliberate pacing that is stunningly beautiful. I told Brad I could watch this movie. I would gladly watch this movie for 90 minutes or however long it was with no sound on. I just watched it because the visual storytelling, the two different styles of the flashbacks versus the present, it was just like stunning. The Studio Ghibli, just the environments they create are just so enriching and just so engulfing. Like it just, I watched it. I've actually watched it twice now. I watched it on a plane and I watched it on a regular screen. I like on the plane, I was like, oh my, I said, oh my, probably like 4 times. And I was like, oh my, like just watching the visual and the way that they were able to, again, break up the different styles where it's like more abstract, which she's remembering versus more detailed, more like the traditional anime style when it's in present day. And being able to visually break up those two distinct things, like you really felt like it was a memory, just in the style, I thought was incredible. Like anytime you get me, whenever you're like, because I'm a visual artist again, and somebody who worked on animated films for like 15 years, how much work you pour into the visual look of it, and to have that be such a strong part of the story is killer. It was awesome. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed this movie enough to watch it. I would have watched it twice, naturally.
So I don't think the Studio Ghibli team is that big, but from what you know, would those two styles be handled by two different teams, or is it the same group doing everything?
So there's an art director with a vision for that. And then there's probably two teams who execute it. That's kind of the way that you do it anyway. Like and again, this is 20 years before I was working. I was, 10 years old when this movie came out. But generally speaking, you have leads who are in charge of specific looks or specific environments or specific areas of the scene of the film, especially because they'll have environment art. Like clearly in this style, there's environment artists and character artists. So when they're the environment artists and the style, like they generally focus like one style in one location or one type of thing. So my guess is that one central visionary had this idea and then two teams executed the specifics of the looks.
They did an amazing job. That was, I think the first thing I noticed was when she gets to the farm in the modern day timeline, everything is drawn so sharply. The outlines of all the crops and the people, they don't move a lot and they're very distinctly drawn. The foreground, the middle ground, the background, they're all very separated in the same way that you would see like your visual spectrum would see them. And then in the younger timeline, it's all foreground. Everything is just like what she remembers is super vivid and anything else is very faded. The corners of the frames are gone. They're almost pure white in a lot of the shots. And one of my, I'd say 3 favorite shots of the movie is when she first talks to the boy who has a crush on her after this baseball game that they watch. He tells her that, they find out they both like cloudy days and they realize they have things in common and they're nice to each other, which is a nice moment for them because all of their friends are making fun of the fact that they might have crushes on each other. And she feels so good that when she runs away from the exchange, she flies into the air. It looks like an old cell animation of like the cell of the character was just lifted off of the background. And she flies into the air and she flies through the clouds and then she lands in her bed. And then my favorite thing about it is it then transitions into her as an adult woman. And she herself, thinking of the memory, can't contain herself and like squirms in her bed. But the bed itself is like very well defined and her character model is very well defined, but she's flopping all over the place. And you get that feeling. Like it helps you to feel that excitement that she felt. And I was like, oh my God, these people are masters. This is crazy that they were able to give us this visual of that feeling of childlike excitement as an adult through a memory in such a vivid way.
These are two funny movies to compare together, right? They're both movies made in 1991 who take flashbacks to the 60s, but they're so different in their handlings of it. Like Oliver Stone is like, I'm going to show you every conspiracy. Like I'm going to show you everything. They're going to say one thing and I'm going to show you what I want you to think. This is like just that, like that subtlety, that getting you to feel the same thing as the character through simple visuals, like the simple styling. It's so cool to see. This is like a master filmmaker at work. Like it really feels masterful in its approach and what it's able to deliver.
Yeah, it's definitely focused on making you feel things. I should mention too that I watched this with my 11-year-old daughter, which I feel like maybe this is why I didn't watch it when it came out, because I mean when it first came out and I bought the DVD, I mean she would have only been 4 or 5 years old, like, and I wouldn't have shown it to her then. I would not have held her attention then. So maybe that's why I didn't get around to watching it then, but I watched it with her now, and it was very much something that she was into and very much something that she responded to in ways, the 5th grade memory. She's in 6th grade right now, so a lot of this stuff felt like very familiar to her and very kind of universal to that experience of being 11, 12-year-old girl. But it was something that, like, even I responded to, just the way in that they filmed it. So I mean, you've got a girl of that age and then a 41-year-old male, and we're both like responding to these same things and having these emotional responses to it. There's not a lot of movies that can do that effectively for both of us. It's really very cool.
I have 2 questions about that experience. One is, how was she with the pacing of the movie?
She does very well. We've done a lot of movies like this. I've kind of built her up, we were like, we watch a lot of movies, and I'm always very open to kind of showing her everything. But now, like with this pacing, and I just kind of tell her, like, this is a Ghibli movie, like this is, and she understands what that means because she's seen quite a few of them now. Like, when she was younger, we watched some of the, you just kind of have to build it up in the right way. Like, you watch Totoro first, like, or you watch Kiki's Delivery Service first, and then you move into Spirited Away. And so, like, she's had the proper like build up to be able to, watch a movie that's paced very slowly like this and kind of understand like that's how it's going to move.
I guess the difference there is, I think that might be good for boys, but for girls, you might think like this is the same as showing someone like Mary Poppins first, but then the next thing you show them is like 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, because this doesn't really have anything like, what's the hook? Now, for a girl who's the same age as the girl in the flashbacks, that's the hook.
Yeah.
But for a 5, 6, 7-year-old child, I don't know that there's a lot here that's going to hold their attention, because so much of what's interesting about the movie, I mean, it's going to be different when you're a kid and when you're an adult. You can get different things out of it. But for us watching is the power of nostalgia and the importance of balancing what you remember of your childhood and what you wanted then for yourself as an adult with what you can actually come to expect, which is so cool.
I think some of the things, so I'm a step behind Jake. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. We've watched only Totoro and Kiki's Delivery Service. We're at that level of like introduction of all this. The detail of the actions that they perform, like just slicing up the pineapple, would have been engaging. Like the detail of smashing up the flour into the powder to make the rouge, like all that stuff is very engaging to a kid. And the fact that they went to that level of detail on it, and the pacing actually doesn't, for my kids anyway, it doesn't really like throw them off. They're fine with the slower pacing. I think that it's just that the normal kid stuff, which is like blah blah blah, blah, like just visual
diarrhea.
Yeah, exactly, is generally too much for them. So this level of pacing, because I think that my kids anyway like the moment to process it, of seeing it, like letting things play out, because they like to explore the frame more than adults do. Like adults are like, okay, got it, check, move on, check, move on, check, and kids are like looking around the whole thing.
Huh, that's so interesting. That brings up you mentioned the pineapple thing. That brings up 2 thoughts for me. One is the Japanese do so much better at illustrating through animation. And you know what? Not just animation. They do it in live action movies too. The sumptuousness of food. Jake, I think we talked a little bit about the taste of things in our 2023 year-end podcast, but that was another movie. It's not Japanese, but that's another movie that does that very well. But Japanese movies do this all the time, and they do it a lot in anime. That was wonderful, but the slowness and deliberateness of certain shots really caught my attention. Like when Toshio is taking Taiko from the train station to the farm. That scene is like 10 minutes long of them sitting in the car talking to each other. And a few cool things happen. One, it's just cool that we spend that much time with them getting to know each other again. But the other thing that's cool, the car stops and then starts again. Like he actually puts the car in park or just brakes the car when they get to a red light, and then they talk. And then they move on, and they take the time to animate him putting the car in a different gear. There's no reason for that to happen. We wouldn't think anything of it if the car was just in motion the entire time. Sometimes the car is in motion for more than 10 minutes. You're on a highway, but he didn't do that. And it let you feel like you were really in that car, and you heard the sound of the gears change, and you heard him like pause to Toshio would pause to think about what he wanted to say next. We just like got to sit in it. And you said, Mike, earlier, I would watch this for 90 minutes in silence. It's a 2-hour movie. It just feels like it's shorter because it is so expertly executed.
There's a lot of detail when you're making, I mean, that's the thing that you tell when I'm watching an animated film, right? You can see that craft, you can see those pauses. And a lot of that is because they probably set up a camera in a car and had 2 people talking and going through the pacing and like the animators will act out this stuff all the time and film themselves just to see those subtle things. And I'm sure they probably did an audio recording of them having a conversation in the car, and you could hear the gears shifting, and it was like, oh, we're in a car. Like there are things that you do it in real life, and then you're like, okay, these are the things that signal what we want to do. Because sometimes it's like a pacing thing. Sometimes that shifting is a reason for the character to pause to think about what they're doing next, because that's naturally what we do. And I think a lot of that, again, is just that attention to detail. There's a confidence in filmmaking that way too. There's a confidence in like the audience will come with us on this. We've got it. Like we don't have to just like spew the words into their ears the whole time. We can pace this out.
I'm glad you mentioned the reference footage, because one of the cooler behind the scenes things I've seen recently, and it was for a movie I didn't actually like that much. It was for Strange World, the Disney movie. But one of the animators or one of the directors on the movie filmed himself climbing up a jungle gym so he could see what his body looks like as and like where he feels where he felt unconfident in like moving up, so that Jake Gyllenhaal's character model could look the same climbing up a mountain. And I just love that they were able to do that. And it illustrates. Now, you mentioned this is in 1991. This was released in 1991, which means it was probably conceived in 1989 or earlier. They didn't have smartphones. And what Disney animators I know used to do, or probably all animators used to do, is have mirrors next to their desks so they could, look at their own expressions and see how their characters could be expressed. But if you don't have an easy camera, if you don't have a smartphone with you, how are you going to know, like, how often do I shift the gear? What does my arm look like when I'm doing that? You're not going to take a giant camera and put it in your car. So probably what had to happen was they did take like a big home camcorder where you put the actual VHS tape in the camcorder, slap it down and have it in the back seat. And then they had to imagine what that would look like from the side.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Can I tell you a time in my career where that backfired? Can I do a little side bridge?
Yeah,
so this was before I actually started working at Blue Skies. It was on Horton Hears a Who. And so Jim Carrey was the main voice, and the studio gave him some creative control over the final output to get him to voice act in the film. And he really wanted the end of Horton Hears a Who. For some reason, he got in his head that he wanted this REO Speedwagon song to finish out the movie. It made no sense. We were all like, this is bananas. This isn't how you should, I can't hide this feeling anymore. Should not be the last bit of Horton Hears a Who. So our animators, one of the guys who ended up directing Nimona, Nick Bruno, great guy, great director, and another one of our lead animators were like, okay, we'll play this out for him. We'll do this in the most ridiculous way. It'll be like a love song between Horton, the elephant, and the mayor of Whoville, a very smart, tiny guy. And we'll do it like they're singing to each other, and we'll mash it up. We'll make it so ridiculous that he will see how bad of an idea this is. And he loved it, and it is now the end of the movie. If you watch the end of Horton Hears a Who, it is madness. And it was because Jim Carrey had some sort of like, I don't know if it was like contractual or what, but had it in his contract that he had this creative control. He wanted this REO Speedwagon. We came up with a really bad way of showing it. And then that's the end of the movie. So it's like, if you're watching and because Horton Hears a Who is a good movie. It's really beautifully done. It's really nice. And then you get to the end, you're like, what is happening? And that's why it happened. It was because we had access to smartphones and we could play it out. And he's like, yes, this is what I want.
That's too bad. I've never seen any of those Dr. Seuss adaptations, animated adaptations. Maybe I need to dive into a few of those.
Yeah, Horton Hears a Who's it's a good one. Like it's the first minute of it was just, but again, biased because I know that people beautiful. Like it's a really beautiful opening to a film. Tough close, but big opening.
Yeah.
Jake, anything else on Only Yesterday?
Actually, we were talking about the driving, the scene where they were driving. It made me think of how you were talking about how they do similar things in live action movies. I literally thought of Drive My Car. That same scene in Drive My Car where they were, just in the car for like 10, 15 minutes, just talking to each other, and just, like how effective scenes like that can be. So that was just another thought I had, and I was wondering if maybe, that was, there was some influence there, if that's something, like maybe Japanese filmmakers, just have a thing with people getting to know each other driving in cars or something.
Well, two things. Ryusuke Hamaguchi is just like one of the best directors doing it right now. His movie Happy Hours, I can't remember whether it's plural or not. So that's a 4-hour film about ladies hanging out. So, he gives himself the space to be able to do things like that, to let people really live in those moments. In Happy Hour, he has I think it's a 30-minute scene of the four main women at an improvement seminar where they like learn how to be more in tune with themselves through breathing. And it's just like you're in the seminar with them. They just do the seminar. So he's able to do stuff like that. And then we saw, Perfect Days came out recently, and there's a lot of folks getting to know each other in cars or right by a van that has cleaning equipment in it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because the main character doesn't talk very much in that movie. Yeah, I don't know if I do think maybe Japanese audiences in general or Japanese production companies have more faith in their audiences to do things like that. But we see it also in European films. We recently talked about Leviathan, a Russian film that had a decent amount of things like that. I mean, more so than most American movies that we see put out.
Certainly, yeah.
A couple quick things about this movie before we break by. Fifth grade is really hard. Those kids were brutal on each other. It's just a reminder, if you have a child in the fifth grade, be kind to them. They're going through it.
Yeah, I had a hard time. There's some of this that I had a hard time with too, just knowing I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what my kid experiences, on a daily basis. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of like very real, visceral things. I thought something that really interesting about this movie too was how she like fantasizes about going to the country when she's a kid. And then as an adult, she kind of like fabricates this, my brother-in-law's family, so I should go out there. Like, I love this idea of us having an idea in our head of an ideal when we're a kid, and that like seeping into adulthood too. I see people do that sometimes where they're obsessed with, like, I just talked to a coworker who's French, and he was like, did you know that in France growing up, we watched a lot of Japanese anime because it was like free and the networks got it for free. So we were pumped with Japanese anime. So there's a lot of affinity for Japanese culture among French people who are now in their 40s.
I have to cut you off because the reverse is crazy. So in Japanese anime, there is a fetishization of France, particularly Paris, that is so intense that there is a phenomenon called Paris syndrome, where Japanese tourists go to Paris, see that it is just a regular city like any other city that has, litter and pickpockets and things like that, and they emotionally cannot handle it and they freak out. It's wild. This is real.
That's crazy. I mean, but this whole idea that she like made it in her head that she's a person who loves the country and loves farming and loves like without ever actually doing it, kind of fantasizing about it and then manifesting it into reality in adulthood as part of this way of dealing with her childhood, which I thought was very interesting. And I also learned about, I told Brett this, I learned about makeup. I didn't know that Flower Petals did that. That was a good bit of information. We did text back and forth. Although we didn't talk about this movie at all, which I was very grateful for. But you did mention something about like you talked about like the class struggle stuff, and I wanted to ask you about that.
She mentions it while she's talking about makeup, that the people who are responsible for this arduous process where 60 bags full of this petal make an ounce of this makeup will never ever actually get to be able to use that makeup. So I thought that was an interesting shoehorn into the movie. And she also talks about the difference between Toshio's dream of being an organic farmer and what that all means, and how that's so much more serious and well thought out than her sort of flippant, I love the country, but I don't know what I want. And I have a great job, but I've never been married. She has so much less of an idea of what she wants to do with her life. So it's the difference between the rural mindset and the urban mindset. What I really liked about what you said about how she idealized the countryside is, the whole point of the movie is that she has brought her fifth grade self with her to the country. By the way, Daisy Ridley does an amazing job as the adult voice. And Dev Patel also an amazing job as Toshio.
For sure.
Agree.
He does everything well. And it's like it's like, this is the last place I expected to see his name and crushed it. Of course he did.
Incredible.
Amazing.
Weird that he got to keep his British accent and Daisy Ridley didn't get to keep hers.
Yeah, what was the choice? What was behind that? Yeah.
No idea. So yeah, she brings along her fifth grade self. And at the end of the movie, after she has seen that one of the things about rural life that she's not ready for, which is time to get married, better get married right now, and that sort of chases her away from staying there, she resolves to not bring her fifth grade self with her when she goes back next time, which makes you wonder, will she go back next time? Will she go back at all, given that her fifth grade self is the reason she went out there in the first place?
I don't know. It's like, is the itch scratched or is it?
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know.
Before we get to top 10, so there's one scene in Only Yesterday that I want to mention was my favorite scene. It's Toshio and Naiko, and it's when they're just kind of looking out over the nature scene or whatever, and it's when he's telling her, all these city people come out to the country and they just think like, oh, it's so beautiful, look at the nature, and he's like, but no, this was all made by man. Like this stream was put together by man, this was put together by man. That's just something that, like, yeah, I'm a city person. I would probably have thought the same thing. You know what I mean? Like it's just not something you didn't think about, and I just thought that was a really nice little scene that kind of stood out for me.
I like that scene a lot because he's telling her she's stupid and she just sort of has to eat it.
Yeah. Well, he's doing it in a very nice, polite way.
Yeah, but ultimately he's being like, he starts by saying, you're wrong. Yeah. Now don't worry. every city person's wrong, but also city people are stupid.
I also liked, there was a moment when she was a kid when they were talking about going to the country and she used like a country voice, but it was like an American, like, oh, no, you don't want, like, it was like an American country bumpkin voice. And I was like, is there an equivalent in Japan? Like, she must have, otherwise they wouldn't have done that. And I was like, and I don't know Japanese or the dialects or what, but I was just like, I thought that was so funny that they translated that all the way down to like the traditional country bumpkin voice.
In at least one Kurosawa movie, there's a reference to, you don't sound like you're from here. You must be from here. That's like the whole premise of the pivotal scene in Inglourious Bastards, where he's from Piz-Palu, and that's why he sounds so weird. But then his fingers give it away. Let's do what we do. It's time for our top 10 movies of 1991. So everybody bring up your lists. Mike, you're the guest. Why don't we start with you?
Oh, this was so hard. So I'm going to preface this by saying that I was 10 years old in 1991. This was my time of like coming up and really starting to understand films. And so I probably had 30 to 35 movies that I loved during this time period. And so there's like a lot that got eliminated, like Cape Fear and Point Break and Backdraft and like all these like really, really strong movies. My Girl. I really like Cadence. I also like Doc Hollywood. I'm gonna give a shout out to Michael J. Fox trying to be a romantic lead for a second before we.
I love Doc Hollywood. Yeah, 100% with you there. Great movie.
It's a great movie. Okay, number 10, personal favorite, LA Story with Steve Martin. I think this is peak Steve Martin year. Father of the Bride also came out this year. LA Story, I think, is an underrated, underwatched. This is just my opportunity to mention it. I think it's a quirky, weird, fun movie that doesn't take itself too seriously.
Pretty sure that LA Story gets a good amount of time in the Steve Martin documentary, the new one that just came out on Apple TV Plus, which is directed by the same guy who made Won't You Be My Neighbor, which is, in my opinion, the greatest documentary that's ever been made.
I don't disagree with any of that, but I think that, yeah, I just think it was like a peak Steve Martin performance. It's a unique movie. I don't know. I can't equate it to anything else. Number 9, I had JFK, which we talked about. Number 8, I had Thelma and Louise. I just thought was again, kind of a one-on-one movie up for that time period. These strong female leads, just like rocking it. It was like Brad Pitt in an iconic performance. It was like definitely breaking the genre of the Sissy Spacek character from JFK. These two women like taking ownership. They talked about sexual violence towards women in a really strong way. And I just thought it was like a profound movie that time. And it really kind of, I give a bonus point for any movie that has an iconic scene. And the last scene of that movie is so iconic that I bumped it into my list just for that. Boys in the Hood was, for me personally, it messed me up as a kid because like I was in suburban Columbus, Ohio at the time and didn't know that Compton existed. And it was like a real eye-opening experience for me into that world that I didn't know was a thing. And so I thought, if movies can do anything like exposing you to things you're not comfortable with or aware of is what they're there for. So I had to make the list for that. Barton Fink comes in as number 6 for me. I think that Barton Fink is an underrated Coen's Brothers movie. I think it's really well done. And maybe I put it in here because I wanted to hear you guys talk about how John Turturro is not Jewish again, because I think
it's a sore spot for me. It just came up with my wife and I the other day too, so it still comes up in my house.
So then we are at number 5. I had Only Yesterday, which I'm, again, incredibly grateful for. I'm totally not biased to have the 2 movies we selected in the top 10 here. That's a genuine feeling. And then I get into 4 movies that are in my all-time favorite movies ever. Number 4 is What About Bob?
Ooh, good one.
A stellar comedy. Richard Dreyfuss is the funniest human being to me in the world in What About Bob? Because so many comedies in that genre just have the main characters do dumb things for comedic purpose, and that whole movie is people making rational choices with comedic outcomes that are just like everyone's doing their best. And I think everybody gives an amazing performance. The movie's tight. There's like 8 total characters in the movie. 5-star comedy for me. It's way up there.
What number was that for you?
4.
All right, so baby steps to your number 3.
Defending Your Life. Again, like a one-on-one movie. Albert Brooks kills it. Meryl Streep is Meryl Streep. The funniest movie, and I've watched it probably 100 times, and I'll keep doing it because I think it's a phenomenal comedy. And number 2, I had Silence of the Lambs. I think that is, it's Silence of the Lambs. I don't think I have to say anymore. I don't think there's more words that need to be said. And then my number 1 movie of 1991 was Terminator 2. I flip-flop 1 and 2 a lot. I was going back and forth, but I think films in genres, and I think that in the genre of 90s action movie, Terminator 2 is perfect. And I really do mean perfect. Like I think that it was, again, the first year that I was aware of film hype, and there was hype around this movie. It delivered. It has amazing stuff. It has not amazing. It had groundbreaking special effects and visual effects in it. Like that, the liquid cop character is just stunning. I think they flipped the script of bad Terminator becomes good Terminator. I think the movie just delivers at every level. The story is tight. The Sarah Connor character, switching what she is from the first film to the second, like in a world of Gremlins 2, so many brave choices in the sequel, and they just absolutely delivered it. And so I think I gave bonus points for being, I think dramas get too much of a bump up in these in lists like this. And so I was like, no, as an action movie, Terminator 2 is just perfect.
It's incredible to me that you cited Gremlins 2 as a brave choices for the sequel and not just like,
No,
out
no,
of
no.
the mind choices for the sequel.
In a world where you just like lots of sequels in that time period, we just like throw whatever at the wall. People will go see it. It's fine. It's don't work too hard on it. Like,
I think Joe Dante knew exactly what he was doing with Gremlins 2, and I love it, but it's a different vibe than what Cameron was doing with Terminator 2. So the movies that I did not comment on were largely ones that I also have on my list, but I'm going to throw out a couple honorable mentions also. Beauty and the Beast, it was nominated, its first animated movie to be nominated for Best Picture, I believe.
Yep.
So that's quite an accomplishment. I think it's not a top 10 Disney movie, nor is it a top 10 1991 movie, but it's very good. I'm a big fan of Steven Spielberg's Hook. I know a lot of people don't like it so much, but that hit me at the exact right time. Robin Williams is just so funny in it, and I'm a giant mark for Dustin Hoffman. Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which I think I might like better than Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It has the great, okay, Jake disagrees, but it has the great Seventh Seal parody, which will get me every time. They also did that in Last Action Hero. And then this is not an honorable mention. It's just a movie that came out the same year that I want to talk about for a second. Have either of you seen Fried Green Tomatoes?
Long time ago. Yeah.
I have not.
Unhinged. It seems like it's going to be like a cutesy period piece about what Jessica Tandy was like as a kid. And then it turns out there's cannibals in it. When it was over, I was like, Annie, what did you make me watch? This is not good.
There are cannibals in Fried Green Tomatoes?
There are.
In my head, I was like, it's Bridges of Madison County. I'm fine.
Yeah, it is Bridges of Madison County until it's not. Kathy Bates is good in it, though.
But when is that not true?
Whoa, back off the ledge, buddy.
She's providing a framing device that the movie doesn't need or deserve, but she's there. Okay, number 10, New Jack City. So this is Wesley Snipes, Ice-T. Most people know this because it's the movie that Ice-T is in. It's awesome. Mario Van Peebles directed it. Seemed like he might have been a big director. That turned out to not be the case. It is the most 90s movie you'll ever see. It's got like the big phones, the floppy disks, the ponytails. It's awesome. Number 9 is Little Man Tate. Speaking of movies directed by actors, Jodie Foster directed and starred in this, about her son who's a genius. This movie was renewed in my memory because of the Jake Johnson animated show Hoops, which I recommend everyone watch as soon as you can. It's so funny. But he talks about Little Man Tate in this show so much that I had to rewatch it. I was like, oh, dang, Little Man Tate is good.
I forgot all about that, but yeah, Hoops is pretty funny.
Hoops is great. My number 8 is Silence of the Lambs. Okay, I'll say a little bit about Silence of the Lambs. Mike didn't. I mean, Anthony Hopkins just blowing it out of the water. Jodie Foster, again, what a year for her, 1991. What's his name? Ted Levine as one of the most underrated, I think, villains of all time in a movie as Buffalo Bob. Just totally terrifying. Buffalo Bill. Yeah. See how underrated he is?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, you're not even getting his name right.
Number 7 is The Addams Family. Barry Sonnenfeld directed, starring Raul Julia, Angelica Houston. It's a big launching off point for Christina Ricci. Christopher Lloyd is here as Uncle Fester. Jake's favorite, Danny Hedaya, is in here as one of the villains. You know, what's not to like?
Perfect casting.
Yeah, Elizabeth Wilson, the other villain. Yeah, they nailed it. It's most people our age's introduction to the Addams Family. It's just perfect. It's so funny. It does Tim Burton better than Tim Burton. It's just like kind of a perfect little comedy and one of the, if not the best adaptation of a classic sitcom into film that there's been. Mike, you left out Point Break. I don't leave out Point Break. Point Break is my number 6. Catherine Bigelow has 0 misses. This movie freaking rules. One of the better heist movies you'll find. Patrick Swayze at his best. Keanu Reeves, pretty good. Oh, Jake's never seen it. That's crazy.
It's a weird. I can't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Wait, really?
So I think that Point Break may have been the original movie I had assigned for you for 91. And then when I knew Mike was going to come on, it's like, let's make it Only Yesterday.
Tough choice, but I think you chose wisely.
My number 5 is Terminator 2. Mike said enough about it. I know you're obsessed with Arnold, Mike. I too am obsessed with Arnold. And we just watched Twins the other day. What a hoot.
Amazing.
This is, it's one of his top 3 movies at least. I think considered by many to be his best. Number 4 is Barton Fink. I've talked about this movie a lot. It's in our Coen Brothers episode. John Turturro is not Jewish, but he plays Jewish very well.
Yeah.
And I will reiterate that John Goodman is the devil in this movie. My number 3, I'm surprised that no one's mentioned this so far, is City Slickers. So
Oh,
Billy
yeah.
Crystal leading, just like, I mean, this and When Harry Met Sally are two of the top of their genre kind of movies. This is like the road trip comedy and the rom-com. And Crystal is like such an unlikely person to be in the lead in either of them. And he's great. But even better than Billy Crystal is Daniel Stern as the neurotic, uptight guy. So funny. You've got Jack Palance, rounding out his career. He won an Oscar for this inexplicably, but it's great.
Over Tommy Lee Jones in JFK, might I add.
I actually agree with that one too. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Jack Palance crushed this one.
And Bruno Kirby in, I think, one of his last roles. Bruno Kirby showing up wherever Billy Crystal is, which is one of the great teams.
I'll second City Slickers as a fantastic movie. I rewatched When Harry Met Sally because I do that about once a year. I forget how much Meg Ryan really carried that movie. And it's just like this. It's like City Slickers too, where I think Billy Crystal strikes the perfect chord. He's the right amount of Billy Crystal in these movies. And he allows some of the supporting actors and Meg Ryan is definitely not a supporting actor in that film, but like it allows them to really thrive. Like Jack Palance is able to bounce off him. He's a quirky straight man in these movies, and it's really funny.
He's the Jerry Seinfeld of those movies where like he assembles this great team around him and just kind of he's like the Earth and there are the moons that are like rotating around him. He like assembles the great team. Yeah, he's perfect as that center.
Totally. Hello. Now, number 2 is Defending Your Life. We've talked about this movie at some length a bunch. Also, Mike, you said a lot of great things about it, but you left out that Rip Torn is just tearing it up in Defending Your Life. But we talked about this quite a bit on our real life episode. And then my number 1 is Only Yesterday, which I think the best Studio Ghibli movie. It is my favorite.
Now I'll go with a couple of my honorable mentions. I actually wrote down a couple of things as you guys were talking to. I was like, oh, I forgot that. Or like, maybe I didn't have marked on my letterbox. I was like, oh, I've definitely seen that. So I want to throw out a couple of honorable mentions. The Warren Beatty film Bugsy, 1991, about the gangster Bugsy. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I do remember really liking that. And ditto for Barbra Streisand's Prince of Tides. I know I've seen both of them because at this point I had started trying to watch all the Best Picture nominees, and those were both Best Picture nominees. So like I remember seeing them and liking them, but it's been a while, so I have to throw them in the honorable mention category. Also going to do that with Boys in the Hood. Like Mike, as you mentioned, same reaction when I saw it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not the small town that I live in northern Michigan at all. But it's again been a very long time since I've seen it. But I do remember like Lawrence Fishburne being just like crazy amazing in that movie. And then another one I didn't have marked on Letterboxd, but a big one for me growing up was What About Bob, which I think is just amazing. And I think you can kind of mark when you become an adult by when you decide that Bill Murray is the funniest person in the movie, and then when you realize that Richard Dreyfuss is the funniest person in that movie.
That's hilarious because it is. It's like when I was a kid, I was like, oh, Richard Dreyfuss is being ridiculous, but Bob's just a nice guy. And now I'm like, oh my God, Richard Dreyfuss, I want to give you a hug, buddy. You're doing all the right things.
He's incredible in that. And then you realize he had a hard time with Bill Murray in real life too. And then I was like, well, now I feel even worse for you.
Wait, that's hilarious. So my buddy Aaron and I went to South Carolina a few years ago, and we saw Bill Murray in the airport, and he was being such a dick to everyone. I can't imagine anyone getting along with him on a set.
That seems to be the case. Yeah. More and more we hear about him. And then my last honorable mention is another one that Brad mentioned. I remember really liking Hook also as a child, and there's just been so much bad talk about it. It's like, I don't want to watch it again.
So on the one hand, I'd say fair, because even when I was a kid, I was like, this movie is long. And when it was on cable, I'd be like, with the ads, I'm like, is this on for 4 hours?
Yeah.
This is crazy. But on the other hand, screw it.
Yeah.
Yeah. My only thing with Hook is just like it feels like a stage play. Like it feels, even as
So
a kid,
what?
I was like,
To that, I say
it didn't do it for
100%
me.
so
Yeah.
what?
It took me out of it as a kid. And it also, but that being said, I thought that Dustin Hoffman just brought it as Hook.
Yeah, and then I forgot to mention before, Bob Hoskins as Smee is one of the funniest characters in like movie history. I think it's unfairly maligned because of the Julia Roberts of it all, and she does a good job. But like, just like a weird choice to sexualize Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
I don't know, like Steve, what were you doing?
Yeah.
But aside from that, it gave us Rufio. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm a big defender of Hook.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw one more movie now because I'm high on it. But Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Never did it.
I like Robin Hood. Yeah, this is like my mom's all-time favorite movie. So like we've watched,
Yeah.
I've watched a lot. I think Robin Hood is cool. Yeah.
I think it's great. I think Alan Rickman, I think Morgan Freeman's great. I think Alan Rickman is just great movie villain in that. And I was like, I almost threw it in.
So top 10. Brad, you just mentioned this one and said none of us had mentioned it yet, but I have City Slickers in my top 10. Yeah, watched it a ton as a kid. Absolutely love it. Sequel notwithstanding, the first one I think holds up pretty well.
The sequel's okay. It's a fine middle ground.
Just not a classic like the original. Number 9, I have Scorsese's Cape Fear. I think it's pretty good. De Niro's great in it. Nick Nolte, of course, is great in it. Juliette Lewis is really very good in it. Number 8 is I have we've talked about at length. I have JFK. And then right next to it, which feels low, but I really love all the other movies on this list too. Number 7 I have is Only Yesterday, which I really loved. But as you'll hear, I also really love the 6 movies I have in front of it.
I just want to say I'm really stoked that I got this movie on both of your top 10 lists, because this is a movie that I don't think a lot of people that we know have seen, even though it's very easy to watch now. It's on HBO Max. So hopefully this encourages more people to watch Only Yesterday.
I've worked in this industry for 20 years. I'd never heard of it. Didn't know it was a movie that existed.
Isao Takahata, aside from Grave of the Fireflies, is just like not given the respect he deserves. Apparently he was kind of a dick, but so's Miyazaki, so whatever.
Yeah, that puts us at number 6. Made both of your lists as well. Barton Fink. It's Coen's, it's Goodman, it's Turturro. I mean, what's not to like? Number 5, Mike, this made your list as well. Thelma and Louise. The 2 lead performances are outstanding. And also it's directed by a dude, Ridley Scott. Like not just a dude, but like a dude who's directed a lot of like manly men movies, and he really did a great job directing this really female led story. And yeah, Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon are just terrific. And yeah, that ending. People know the ending of that movie even if they don't know what movie it's from, or if they've never seen it, they could see it and be like, oh yeah, I know what like I've seen that.
Do you think that there is a more unlikely Ridley Scott movie than Thelma and Louise? Because I think the only one that even comes close is Matchstick Men.
Or maybe Legend is a little.
I don't even know what Legend is.
Oh,
is
really?
that the Tom Cruise fantasy
Yeah.
movie? Yeah, I wouldn't have expected that.
That's a little, yeah. I think Legend or Matchstick Men and Thelma and Louise, would be pretty unlikely for Ridley Scott for sure.
All right, keep it going.
Keep going. All right, number 4. Yeah, I'm a little higher on this movie than you are, but this, again, may play into the nostalgia childhood factor, but is number 4 for me is Beauty and the Beast. I love it. It is a top 10, top 5 Disney movie for me. And then number 3 on down is going to be real familiar to everybody. Number 3 for me is Albert Brooks' Defending Your Life, which was a movie I did not see until very recently and only saw because Brad recommended it to me. So thank you, Brad. Love Defending Your Life, one of my favorite Albert Brooks movies. And then number 2 is Silence of the Lambs, which again, discussed at length. Hopkins great, Jodie Foster's great. And then my number 1, just like Mike, is Terminator 2. I think it's a perfect movie. My wife had never seen it. We watched it I think 2 years ago. Everything about it holds up. I mean, it still looks great. The story's great. The acting is great. I mean, the Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor character, the way it evolves is really cool. I mean, the ending is great. They ripped it right off for Alien 3. And even Terminator 2, like I think you can get a lot more out of it having seen the first one and kind of seeing like how the Terminator character evolves and how Sarah Connor evolves. But you can also literally just watch Terminator 2 on its own and kind of get enough out of it to to really get the movie. And I think that's a cool thing for a sequel too.
But imagine, and I'm going to do this with Annie soon. Imagine you've never seen either of them and somehow don't know much about them in 2024, and you watch them back to back. How crazy is that babyface turn going to be for you? They didn't even let audiences in 1991 have that. They put it in the trailer that Arnold was the good guy now because of all the Arnold of it all, like the sweeping the world. Imagine it's now. You can avoid it somehow. And I'm so stoked to do this.
That's going to be fun.
It always drives me nuts when there's those missed opportunities. I do it now more than I ever did before, which is just going to movies completely blind. I've done it recently with a few films. I did it with Only Yesterday, and it was the right choice. Working on these movies, you realize how much of the trailer is taking out of your hands. It's like another company just does trailers and they just tell you what they want. And like you as the filmmaker don't have much control over what the audience sees before the film comes in, which is a big bummer.
That's insane to me. And that's the main reason I have given up watching trailers entirely, unless like I'm in the theater and I have to. But like when those trailers drop online or whatever, it's like, oh, check out the trailer for whatever. Like, absolutely not. Like I am savvy enough movie watcher where I can tell like what I want to see and what I don't want to see, and like I don't need a trailer to inform that decision for me. And I don't want to watch because I don't want to know. Like there's certain things that are put in trailers. Like I don't want to know this about a movie. I'd rather, like I said, go in blind, go in fresh, and just let it all happen in front of me.
Yeah, I think the biggest perpetrator of this was Thor Ragnarok in recent years, just spoiling that the Hulk was in it, which would have been such a cool reveal.
How awesome would that have been? Yeah. Like, I mean, like when we went to Star Wars, The Force Awakens, like, I don't remember what the trailers were for that, but like, did they show the Millennium Falcon in the trailer?
100%.
Right. Like that sucks. I mean, you could probably assume that it was going to be in the movie, but still, like, how much cooler would it have been if you just saw it in the movie for the first time rather than, oh yeah, I saw it 20 times in the trailer.
The business of the movies makes the movies very hard to enjoy.
Yep, it does.
All right. Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. We really
Mike.
appreciate it. We had a lot of fun with you here. Why don't you tell folks where they can see more of your good work?
Yeah, thanks, Brad. No, guys, honestly, this has been such a honor to be. I've been an avid listener of the show. Jake, I was so glad I got to meet you at Brad's wedding. I've heard about Brad mentioning my buddy Jake for years, and it was such a pleasure to like get to know you and get to be on the show. Yes, you can.
Likewise.
I'm on all the social medias at Michael Tanzillo. You can find me there. I write if you're interested in 3D animation or the life of being a 3D artist, I write a weekly newsletter called The 3D Artist. You can find me on Substack there. And that's all my things. Yeah. Or just email me, michaeltanzillo@gmail.com.
I would also recommend checking out Mike's YouTube channel, unless you're like me and you have an aversion to seeing gross things, because sometimes he just throws eyeballs and guts in a ball and says, let's animate around it.
I was at conferences for like the 2 weeks prior to making that, and I was just like itching to do something. Being in recycled air conference rooms for 2 weeks straight did a weird thing to me, and I came out of that and I made a weird skinny eyeball toothy thing.
Just saying that, right? I got weird with it is not enough of a warning for how disgusting that was. I was really grossed out by it. But you are very talented. It evoked an emotion. If you want to know what is coming out next week, go to our Letterboxd profile. You can find me at Brad Garoon on Letterboxd. I think, Jake, you're Jake Ziegler on Letterboxd.
Yep, it's Jake_Ziegler.
And both of us have pinned to our profiles our Never Did It podcast list. You could also just search for the Never Did It podcast list. And the 2 movies that will be discussed on next week's episode are always at the top of that list.
We have a Facebook page now as well. You can check that out at facebook.com/neverdiditpodcast. I'll be posting on that with new episodes and just fun updates from time to time about what we're watching and what's coming up.
So check that out. And thank you for joining us for Never Did It.